Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has expressed dissatisfaction with the performance of the service chiefs in the counter-insurgency war and other security threats confronting Nigeria. The president, who gave the verdict last week at a meeting with the service chiefs, warned that he would no longer tolerate excuses from them for the failures and their apparent inability to protect the territorial integrity of the country. President Buhari reminded them that no one was forced on him, as he selected everyone individually based on what he felt were their track records. He warned them to live up to expectations in the discharge of their duties. According to him, a lot of responsibility had been placed on their shoulders, and it was extremely important that they do not disappoint the populace. The meeting came on the heels of the outcry by many persons in the north and socio-cultural groups in the region who called for removal of the service chiefs due to the rising spate of murderous attacks in the northeast by Boko Haram and the Islamic State of the West African province, ISWAP. And in the northwest, where so-called armed bandits have unleashed a reign of terror in recent weeks. Here, to dissect the spate of rising insecurity in northern Nigeria and whether the service chiefs have outlived their usefulness or not, we have today on this program Professor Usman Yusuf, Professor of Hematology, Oncology, and Bone Marrow Transplantation, and a former Executive Secretary of the National Health Insurance Scheme, NHIS, and Mr. Mahmoud Jega, columnist and chairman of the Daily Trust Editorial Board. But before then, we'll teach to the statement by the National Security Advisor, and then we'll return to welcome Professor Yusuf and Malam Jega to the program.
Mr. President has expressed great concern over the declining security situation in the country. He is extremely unhappy about what is happening, and he feels that even though the security agencies are doing their best is not good enough for him, and he wants an immediate reversal of the current trend, an immediate reversal of our misfortunes in all their dimensions. Mr. President also told us clearly, in no uncertain terms, that he and indeed the administration came to power on the platform of three issues: fighting insecurity, overcoming our economic difficulties, and dealing with the scourge of corruption. And he also noted that it takes common sense for anyone to understand that without security, the pursuit of the other two objectives will just be an exercise in futility. And therefore, he wants the security agencies to take into consideration the wider implication of the gradual descent of the security of this country.
Well, welcome to the program, Professor Yusuf and Malam Jega. Good to have you here. Thank you very much for agreeing to join us on this day live. Let me start with you, Professor Yusuf. You just listened to the National Security Advisor. What's your take on the president reading the Riot Act? Do you think this is too little, too late? Many Nigerians have said what we want is not a Riot Act. What they want, according to Afenifere, for example, or the Pan-Niger Delta Forum, PANDEF, is for the service chiefs to be sacked, fired. They think that they have outlived their usefulness. But what's your own take? What do you think? Malam Jega, I will come to you later on the same question. Hello, Professor Yusuf. I can't hear you here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Yes. We all saw We also the press conference after the president. And I will tell you, if anything did not give me any comfort, if anything, it made me worried. 5 years into the administration, we're still talking about safeguards. We're still talking about improving synergy between the services. I mean, it's too late. What's been happening, we've done years, we're 4 years to go. And what we are seeing is deteriorating security, especially in the Northwest. So it's not acceptable. We have seen these meetings time and time again, where the president has met service chiefs, and at the end, nothing happens. So we have to go beyond meetings and honestly see real, actionable differences in the lives of our people. We've not been seeing that. I'm highly disappointed, I'm not happy. And I ask myself, what are they going to do now that they've not done in the last 5 years? So we have work to do. Nigerians are not happy. We're here to tell the government to hear. We love this country more than we love anything.
Malam Jega, you are with me. What's your own take on this subject? Do you want the service chiefs fired?
Well, the way I see it, the president is the only elected officer in the executive branch. And he is the one who is accountable to the people of Nigeria. If he wants to retain the service chiefs, that is his prerogative. But in the end, he is the one who will be held responsible for the overall outcome. Now, this riot act that you said he read should have been read a very long time ago, because this problem didn't start today. The Boko Haram insurgency is more than 10 years old now. And the banditry in the Northwest and in the North Central has also been on for nearly a decade. So it's not, I believe, a problem that just reading the Riot Act today can solve. Although, of course, the security agencies have the personnel and the equipment to do something. It may not solve the problem entirely. That one will require going back to the drawing board and also addressing the inadequacies of the security agencies and of society generally in order to be able to tackle such a terrible problem.
Well, Malam Jega, let me stay with you a little bit. You wrote an article on June 15, which was titled Fire from Borno to Sokoto. And you talked about the transformation in the North, a once peaceful North that has now become a hotbed of violence and banditry. What, in your opinion, accounts for that transformation, which surprised you?
Well, Ruben, it was slow in coming. The truth is that up until 20, 30 years ago, northern Nigeria was in many ways the most peaceful part of the country, even though there were other problems. Like I said, there was some political violence, there were intercommunal clashes, and every now and then you also have some violent religious sects. But with respect to crimes such as armed robbery, the North was quite peaceful until fairly recently. Now, the two major problems that we have, the Boko Haram problem and the banditry problem, they have slightly different roots. Boko Haram is only the latest fanatical pseudo-religious sect that we are having in northern Nigeria. But you know, we had others dating back to the 19th century. The worst before Boko Haram was the Metatsine that we had from 1980 to around 1993. So Boko Haram is just a continuation of that, even though it upped the ante with its ideology of opposition to Western education, which is a fairly new phenomenon. As for the bandits in the Northwest, what is apparent is that the old pastoral society is facing an unprecedented crisis. It's a combination of many things, population pressure, social pressure, environmental degradation, and many things. So a lot of the pastoralists lost their cattle and resorted to cattle rustling. And it looks now like the elders of the pastoral community have lost control over the youth. And let's be frank, this is not the first time this is happening in Nigeria, because I remember former President Obasanjo saying in 1999 that the elders of the Niger Delta lost control over the youth of the Niger Delta. So we have this terrible situation on our hands. It's not something that can be solved overnight, but at the minimum we have to seriously reduce the violence in both Northeast and Northwest, and also parts of the North Central, before the government must now sit down and address the long-term solutions to these problems.
Well, Professor Yusuf, the same day that Mahmoud Jega wrote Fire from Borno to Sokoto, you also wrote an article, just by coincidence, Silence in the Face of Evil is Evil Itself. And I enjoyed reading the piece very much, but I was concerned that you concentrated on northern Nigeria, Arewa North, Arewa as it were. You didn't nationalize the subject. Is there a special reason for that? Because
yes,
I thought you would have considered the whole country.
Yes, there is. So look at the map of Nigeria. There is no banditry in the southeast, south, or southwest. The whole of the north, the three geopolitical zones in the north, the northwest, northeast, and north central have become killing fields of these bandits. And before 2015, the northwest was not where it is today. I could drive from Abuja, where I'm from, without any fear. Now I cannot drive from Abuja to Kaduna, but you can drive from Lagos to Ibadan without that fear. So yes, banditry and insecurity is more acute in the whole of the north today. And that was why I needed to raise that issue and ask everybody, every man and woman of conscience, silence is not the answer. Our leadership, we voted them into power, and our democracy does not end at the ballot box. We have to hold them accountable. Our people are being killed every day. We are having mass graves in the north all over. You don't see mass graves anywhere in the south. Our women are being raped. There is famine. And yes, we must raise our voices and be very angry, and our anger should be loud and clearly heard. This is serious. So yes, acute insecurity is in the north, the whole of the three geopolitical zones in the north. And that was why I made that point, that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. So we must all raise our voices so that our leadership will hear us loud and clearly.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, in that your piece, you held President Buhari personally responsible. You accuse him of being uncaring, of not paying enough attention. Will you, in retrospect, consider that fair criticism, considering the fact that, yes, the buck stops at his desk, but he has assigned the job to some people, and the governors also have a role to play?
Good. So when people talk about service chiefs, I'm not worried about service chiefs. I did not elect any service chief. We elected President Muhammadu Buhari twice to run this nation. And the buck stops there. If anybody is not doing his work, just say, thank you very much, General, for your service to the nation. We need to move on. The security of this nation is over and above any single individual or agency. So It is the responsibility of the president, and he alone we will hold responsible. No governor has control over any security agency. The governor in my state, Katsina State, has literally given up. He's thrown in the towel. People are being killed every day. He does not have an army, neither does he have an air force or intelligence agency. So the responsibility is at the center. The responsibility is the president, not the service chiefs, because we did not elect them. He can fire anybody or hire anybody he wants today. But the states have given up. And our governor in Katsina State has said it, literally, thrown in the towel, and apologized to our people in Katsina that he cannot look at them in the eyes because he has failed them. He said it. And I commend him for his stand, but in many places he will resign for doing that. So yes, the responsibility is the president, and he needs to take that responsibility seriously. If anybody is not doing what he needs, he has to go. He has to go.
Well, Malam Jaga, let me come to you. Do you share the view that the governors are more or less helpless in this matter? You having concluded in your essay that the security of lives and property is something that cannot be negotiated at any level.
Well, there is no doubt about that. And the fact of the matter, as Prof said, is that all the security agencies in Nigeria are federal. There is some level to which the state governors exercise some little control over police commands and other security agencies in their states, but it is very little. And it is the federal government that recruits, trains, arms, pays, motivates, and ultimately commands the security agency. So to that extent, it is primarily a federal responsibility. And as Prof also said, we shouldn't be wasting too much time about the fate of the particular service chiefs, because only the president is elected, and he is the one who the electorate must hold accountable. However, that is not to say that state governors and even to some extent local government chairmen have some input and some influence over the security matters in their own states. It's not only deploying security agencies, other things can be done, and governors and even local government chairmen have a lot of resources, not enough resources, but a lot of resources at their disposal. I mean political resources, they have traditional rulers, they have political parties with deep roots in the community, they have access to elders. So there are many things that can be done, although ultimately security is a federal responsibility.
Well, Professor Yusuf, let's talk briefly about one of the points you raised in your piece, which is about rape, the rape of women in the North. And I guess someone will extend it and say across Nigeria. The Attorney General of the Federation is proposing special courts, the opening of a sexual offenders register in police formations, and other measures, including the review of relevant laws to address this. Do you think that this is a good step in the right direction?
Well, he should go to the forest. He should go to the forest and tell those bandits. These guys are not ruled by any law. They are high on tramadol and cannabis. They come into our villages in the middle of the night in their hundreds on motorcycles and bang into the doors when people are laying down with their family and rape their women, their wives, and their mothers in front of them. And we're making laws here. We need to go deal with them in the forest, not here in Abuja making laws. Yeah, law is good. We've always had laws against rape. But you think these guys are governed by any law? So let's be serious about this. These bandits are lawless. We need to deal with them. And yes, the law is okay, it's good. But security, go and deal with these bandits that are terrorizing and raping our women. So rape in any society, in any culture, is evil. And everybody must speak up against it. The laws are good, but these guys do not follow any law. Go flush them out of the forest and then bring them into the cities for justice.
Well, Malam Jaga, what are your thoughts on the way forward? Because as Nigerians, we are aware that at some point the service chiefs told us that they were rejigging the security architecture. Somewhere down the line, we were also told that a national security strategy document had been prepared, and that was advertised and celebrated. But all of that seems not to be working. What, in your opinion, needs to be done?
Wow, it's a complicated problem. I'm not a security expert by any means, but what is obvious is that the security agencies in Nigeria do not have enough personnel, enough material, and enough motivation. Certainly, because as anybody can see, the army is heavily engaged fighting Boko Haram for 10 years, and then suddenly you have security problems all over the country, and it has all kinds of operations in the east, in the west, in the Niger Delta, in the north central, in the northwest. You have all kinds of security operations. So clearly, the military is undermanned. Now, what I cannot understand is because this problem didn't happen yesterday or the day before. It has been on for 10 years at least, and there was no reason why the federal government did not seriously augment the number of men and women in the security agencies. I mean, I gave the example in the write-up that you mentioned that during the Civil War, the army grew from 15,000 to 250,000 in less than 3 years. So much so that when the Civil War ended, the federal government that time of Gawan and later the Murtala Obasanjo regime had to talk about demobilization because they had 250,000 soldiers on their hands and there was no need for them. Now, I wish we had 250,000 soldiers today, or even maybe 200. I don't know exactly how many we have, but certainly the number is an issue. But more than the number, it's also the equipment and the mobility, because like fighting Boko Haram is not an issue of very large number. It is arming and the equipping and protecting them very well. I believe the government is doing some few things in that direction, but there just has to be an emergency situation. And I don't mean just signing papers and saying you have declared a state of emergency. That is not the issue. You have to be truly on a war footing in order to augment and to equip all the security agencies in the northwest, in the northeast, in the north central, and all parts of the country, because security should be number one. If that is the only thing that the government does in the 3 years remaining for the administration, you would have done something. Because without it, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters.
Well, Malam Jaga, just before we wrap up this conversation, if we were to rate the Buhari administration in the last 5 years from, say, 0 to 100, what percentage will you give him? And I'll come to you, Professor Yusuf, to also do your own rating very briefly before we go. Yes, Malam Jaga, you go first. That's beyond security if you take the entire
score
performance.
To award. Yeah.
You said what?
I said I have no marks to award to the administration.
Oh, does that mean 0? Does that mean 0, Malam Jaga?
No. I used to be a lecturer, and
yes.
You don't award marks without seeing the scripts and having a marking.
No, but you have a script before you: security, the economy, and fighting corruption.
In security, the score is very poor. With respect to the economy, the score is poor. And with respect to fighting corruption, the scorecard is very controversial.
Okay, now over to you, Professor Yusuf. Well, you are also a teacher like Malam Jaga. So what's your own scoring sheet looking like?
On what?
On the three key issues in the last 5 years: security, fighting corruption, and the economy.
Good. So it's very simple. In economy, ask a common Nigerian, is his life better today than it was 5 years ago? The answer is no. On security, are we safer today than 5 years ago? I come from the northwest, from Katsina. I could drive from here to Katsina without molestation, go through Abuja, go from Abuja to Kaduna, Kankara, and Katsina. Can I do that now? No. 9 local governments in Katsina are under the control of these bandits. Go to Katsina and ask them. Go to Zamfara and ask them. Go to Sokoto and ask them. Plateau, Adama, the story is the same. So security is an F. The economy is an F. What else? Corruption is more verbal than real. So as a teacher, I'll rate this government an F. And they have to do better. And they have 3 years to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Usman Yusuf, and thank you very much, Malam Mahmoud Jega, for joining us today on This Day Live. It's time now for a break here on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Joining me now in the studio are Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Bolitech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough. Well, Prof and Yemi, good to have you here. Again, you listen to Professor Yusuf and Malam Mahmoud Jega, Chairman Editorial Board of the Daily Trust newspaper, on the issue and the challenge of insecurity in Nigeria. So quickly, without wasting time, I'd like to take your thoughts on the various issues that the two gentlemen raised. Yemi, let me start with you.
I think the real focus was on security, and I think Professor Yusuf was very clear about what he thought about the president's inactivity or inaction on the matter. Yes, the service chiefs are not elected, so he has the prerogative to change them, and that's been a demand. At least I know my organization has been part of other coalitions asking for the service chiefs to be fired. And so this current reading the Riot Act, he dismissed it, which I want to do as well, because it means nothing. This is 6 years into it, and we keep doing the same thing. I think it's Einstein that says you do the same thing expecting different results. And that's the definition of insanity. That's a bit of a problem. And for Malam Jega, Malam Jega tried to be diplomatic, but because I was writing here that what is Malam Jega saying? I'm not quite sure. At one point he said the army needs to be equipped. Another time he said the governors and the local government chairman have a role to play. A role to play in what? In dealing with local militia to help when there's a government in place that has the state's powers of the state to enforce security. But by the end, when you asked him to score the administration, he then became very clear, at least in the scoring, I would take him on that rather than the things he said before, that the government has scored very poor when it comes to security. Look, when you have the president of a country, when the country is going through something like a pandemic and hasn't addressed the country in maybe 2 months, if I'm not mistaken, and then you have a situation where even his home state is being ravaged, the governors are crying out for help, people are then protesting, and then you arrest them. They've arrested 2 leaders of protesting, Katsina, for organizing protests and speaking out against the government. Now, if that's the messaging you are sending, and then you send your national security advisor to make a statement about the Riot Act, and you don't have the boldness nor the courage to address your country as the commander-in-chief of the country and say, look, this is enough. We've given the service to you that fire them, whatever, actually clear steps of what you are doing to save the lives of your people. Now, if this was in the South, and Professor Yusuf made the point quite clearly that his article focused on the North because the North is where the heat is. If this was in the South, we could easily say that President Buhari, it's a North-South, but this is in the North. And some feedback has been like people expected a Messiah. He's watching his people get, quote unquote, get murdered and doing nothing. And that's what Professor Yusuf called being uncaring. So I think it's significant that people, elite in the North are speaking. The population in the North generally, I'm not the whole North, but people in the North, both at sort of everyday citizens in the North organizing protests.
The masses.
Yeah, I try not to use that word, but anyway, everyday people organizing protests and speaking out, and the elites like Professor Yusuf and Malam Jega also speaking out. Now, for a president who, I mean, but again, let's be also very clear. There's nothing that President Buhari is doing now that's not consistent with his pattern of behavior over the last 6 years. So I think part of it maybe is really us beginning
5 years, you mean?
Oh, 5 years, thank you. Over the last 5 years. So I think part of us is really us re-examining why we expecting him to do anything different. Maybe we think
Prof,
the height of the killings
let's have Prof's
will change
input
that.
very quickly. So
I would like to agree to disagree with my two brothers, Professor Usman Yusuf and Malam Jega. Agreement on the one hand, to the extent that we only have President Buhari as the only person elected, executive, and he should be held responsible. Agreement to the extent of their scoring, security-wise, poor, corruption, controversial, and then economy. Professor Yusuf asks, was life safer? Do they have more to eat? And so on and so forth. To this extent, I agree. But I disagree because of the confusion of the meaning of banditry in the context of Nigeria. Dr. Onaikomo, a leading security expert, has done a lot of research and has come up with a beautiful argument that has not been denied, which is the fact that banditry in the context of Nigerian meaning is nothing more than terrorism. Now, we have Boko Haramis on the one hand. You talk about ISWAP, Islamic State of
the West African
province. Now, this is nothing more than an instrument of jihadist terrorism. Now, it's a manifestation of terrorism par excellence. So if people are looking at bandits as if they are just thieves, using violence all along.
Well, that's
so
Professor Yusuf's argument in his essay. He says the crisis you have in the Northeast is ideological, predominantly. What you have in the Northwest is basically criminality. He made that distinction.
Yes, you see, when you say criminality, stealing, is it not a crime? Killing is
about
not
the
a crime.
ideology behind the criminality.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that's why I talk about agreement and disagreement. For as long as the authority does not want to take banditry as an extension of terrorism by excellence, then this issue of saying you are sending service chiefs away. Professor Yusuf said that in his answer to security, he said they should go to the forest. I had to go and fight them. That's where the insecurity is. You are talking about rape all along. You are talking about court. What will the court do? When the criminality, the acts of crimes are taking place in the forest.
Okay.
So this is
points
the
were made on the challenge of insecurity in the country. Let's take another interesting
Sorry,
subject,
can I say that before we go to
which
that?
is the Edo State
No,
situation.
just on the rape, because of what's the scourge in the country at the moment. I love Professor Yusuf's point about that the laws are not the problem, that we have laws, but we have people who are not obeying laws, so that we should put that in perspective. A sexual register
which is why
already
everybody
exists.
is calling for reform of the laws and other institutional reforms.
Yeah.